Good morning, everyone. This is David Owen with Changescape Web, and welcome to this episode of the Real Producers Partners Podcast. Joining me today is Greg Showe from Asset Prevention Incorporated. Asset Prevention was established in 1990, and they are recognized as a national leader among 1031 exchange companies. They have successfully completed over 200,000 IRC Section 1031 exchanges, and today we'll learn more about their business and why 1031s are important. Glad you could join us today, Greg. I look forward to learning more.
Hey, David. Appreciate the introduction, and I really appreciate having me on the call today. So looking forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. So tell us why 1031s are important.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to start more on the on the what. A lot of times, in the scope of what I do, we get a lot of questions. And what I'd like to do today is cover some common questions, cover some common conversation topics that I'm having in today's market, and kind of give some ideas to the listeners to, what we're seeing, what we're doing, and, maybe they can take away some keynotes or some, little nuggets that they can take back to their business and utilize in it. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give my response. So let's say you and I were having a conversation and you came to me and said, "Hey, Greg, I want to sell a piece of property. What is this thing called a 1031?" So what I'd like to do is I'd like to give my 30-second, call it my elevator speech.
Okay.
And what I'd like to do is kind of break that out and break that apart a little bit and kind of explain why I say what I say.
Okay.
There's a little bit of tax code in there. There's a little bit of kind of my response, because at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're section, like you mentioned, section 1031 of the tax code. It is tax code. Okay. Now, I don't know about you. Tax code is boring, right? I'm not the person that sits around at night and just reads tax code to read tax code, right? But I've been doing this for almost 20 years. A lot of it in a part-time capacity, but most recently in a full-time capacity here in St. Louis. But it's a national program that can give somebody the advantage when building the real estate portfolio.
Okay.
So let's go in the definition. So, ask me the question, what is a 1031 exchange?
Yeah.
Here's what I would tell you.
Yeah. What's a 1031 exchange?
Here's what I would tell you. Our first conversation, a 1031 exchange is an IRS approved program that allows an owner of real property to defer up to 100% of their capital gain tax on property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for investment, as long as you exchange into property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for an investment. That's my elevator speech, right? So let's take a few minutes and kind of break that apart. So the first part is an IRS approved program. I also refer to it as a process. One thing to know about 1031, it's a process. It doesn't matter if you have a single family rental or a multi-million-dollar office building. The process to maximize 1031 is the same. And it's funny because I've had recent conversations, and you would think in the world of Google and social, the internet, you would think that people would do a little bit of homework on this. But I literally have had recent conversations. When I say this with people, they literally come back and they say, "Well, aren't I supposed to pay taxes? This doesn't sound legal, right? Because the IRS wants me to pay taxes." Like, no, this is an IRS approved program. It has been around since the 1920s. So I tell folks, if you want to take advantage of it, let's figure out a way to take advantage of it. So that's the first part. Remember, it's an IRS approved program. It's legit. Like, this isn't a pie in the sky kind of program, and it's kind of a it's not one of those things that's going to be coming or going. It's been around since the 1920s, so it's here to stay. So the next thing about this answer is that it allows an owner of real property. And I want to kind of hone in on that a little bit. One, because I believe most of the audience they're listening are real estate professionals or in the real estate space. A lot of times when I talk to real estate professionals, when I ask them, what qualifies for 1031, their typical response is, well, it's real estate. What we need to do is step back and take a look at the actual definition per the Treasury regulations. It actually says real property. Now, most of the 1031s, like you mentioned, 200,000 plus, there's been hundreds of thousands more in the 1031 space. Most of them involve what we call bricks and mortar, real estate for real estate. That's most of the 1031s that we see. However, by definition, and this is where you need to be careful from a real estate professional's perspective, you need to make sure that you, instead of saying real estate, you need to say real property, because that's really what the tax code says. It's real property. And I'll give you some examples here in a few minutes on what we're seeing, what qualifies outside of the typical bricks and mortar. It's actually, I said earlier, tax code is boring, but when we see deal structures and things that qualify and things that are approved, it's actually kind of interesting and actually unique to know that some of these things could qualify. So we'll get into that just a little bit, but let me go to the next one. So real property to defer up to 100%. Another common question that I receive is that I was under the impression that I had to defer all of my capital gain tax in order to do a 1031 exchange. That's not necessarily true. Okay. So let's say, for example, somebody sells a property and they have, they're looking at their gain. And I said, well, I'd like to keep some of that money back. I'd like to keep some money back and maybe take my wife on vacation, maybe pay off some debt. Here's the neat thing about it. The definition that I use is up to 100%. That's the goal. We have clients all the time tell us, you know what, I'm only going to defer this amount of money. I want you to hold back 20,000, 30,000, 50,000, 100,000, whatever, because I want to go do whatever I want to do with it. And that's okay. But a lot of times people have this misconception, whereas in order for me to do a 1031, I've got to defer all of it. And that's not the case. We call those partial exchanges. Anybody can absolutely say, hey, Greg, guess what? I want to keep 20,000 out because I want to go on vacation. I want to do this, I want to do that. But just remember, we always tell them to have their conversation with their tax advisor. Just know that the money that you're going to receive, which is what we refer to as boot, more than likely is taxable. And they're okay with that. I mean, I've had people tell me, I want to keep $300,000 out of the exchange, and we go through and we share with them with their tax advisor. They're okay with that. They're going to pay the taxes on that money that they hold back. They're going to defer the rest of it, and they're going to move on. So again, it's not 100% or zero. It's, the goal is up to 100%. That's the goal, is defer up to 100%. So the next part of this definition is property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for an investment. Again, by definition, this is what it should look like. Property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for an investment. And I'll also go through in a few minutes, talk about things that do qualify, property that does qualify, property that does not. So that's kind of the caveat with both of those, real property and productive use in a trade, business, or for an investment, as long as they exchange into property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for an investment. So, kind of wrapping up that 30-second elevator speech, it's an IRS approved program. Yes, you can do it. It's a process. It's the same for everybody. You can defer up to 100%. If you want to hold money back, that's fine. We see a lot of that. Property held for productive use, trade trade, business, or for an investment, as long as you exchange into that. But that's really by definition, that's what it really kind of looks like in a nutshell, kind of a 50,000-foot overview. Okay. So, from this point, what I'd like to do is kind of move into the next scenario and talk about some of the types of property that do qualify. Right? Remember, that was the thing earlier. What qualifies? Because that's a lot of times the next question for people that they have for us. Well, what qualifies for real property? And what we like to tell people is any property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for an investment. But kind of the rule of thumb that we go off of, as long as it's not your primary residence, as long as it's not what they consider a second home or treated as a second home, there's a category, what we call dealer status, which I'll go into in a minute. And then there's also a category, what we call interest in a partnership, that don't qualify. So those are kind of the top four that don't qualify. But let me tell you what's really exciting about things that do qualify. So let's say you have somebody that owns a farm, right? They own a farm, they owned it, It's appreciated in value. They've owned it for a number of years. They can do a 1031. They can do a 1031 into not only other farms, and this is again going back by definition, they could actually exchange into other properties like office buildings, retail buildings, medical buildings. The definition of it is a broad range of properties that qualify. I've had conversations with people that say, well, if I own a farm, I've got to exchange into a farm. That's not necessarily true. We've seen a lot of people sell out of farms into office buildings, income producing. We've seen people, sell income producing properties and exchange into farms. So, those are some things that we see, again, kind of the cookie cutter deals.
Sure.
Bricks and mortar, call it real estate. We'll just say real estate. Here's where it gets really interesting, and to me, it gets exciting. By definition, real property. We're seeing a lot of people exchange into vacation homes. Now, there are some additional things. There's a revenue procedure out there that people need to follow. There's some extra things to kind of consider and plan for if you want to exchange into a vacation home. But we're seeing one of the trends that we're seeing people exchange into a vacation home, along with other types of properties. Another thing that we see exchanges on easements. So an actual easement, if you have, let's say you have an easement with a utility company, or let's say you have an easement with a solar company, or, a conservation easement. By definition, and again, there's a little bit of planning involved. We've got to look and see what the easement looks like. We've actually seen owners of easements exchange easements and exchange that into other fee simple property.
Huh.
So that's another example. We see some, and it depends on what part of the country you're in. We see owners of oil, gas, and mineral rights. If you have an oil, gas, or mineral right, depends on the structure of the deal, the structure of the lease. We've seen individuals exchange oil, gas, and mineral rights. And again, that's the neat thing about the definition. So real estate professionals, I have the conversation, they always want to do real estate, right? Because that's what they do. That's what they know.
Right.
By definition, it's real property. Another neat example, if I can, I'll do it a bit. I do it on my visual here. What we call air rights, or TDR. There was an owner of a property. If everybody knows where Central Park is in New York, there was an owner of a property in New York that owned a building that was the first row overlooking Central Park. Okay. The owner behind him was taller. The owner behind him decided that he wanted to convert his building into high-end luxury condos. Well, what would prevent this guy in the front from ever in the future building on top of his building? So what this owner back here behind did is he bought the air rights to prevent any building to be done on the building in front of him. And then that person that was going to receive all that money for those air rights took the air right proceeds that he received and did a 1031 exchange into another building over on another part of Central Park.
Huh.
So there's air rights.
Wow.
Another example that we see. It really is neat to see some of the deals that come through our office. Like, again, as long as it fits the definition of real property under the Treasury regulations, it's really neat to see how we can structure those deals. But again, most of the time, a majority of the deals that we do are quote unquote real estate, because we work a lot with real estate professionals in the real estate space.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's kind of the some of the neat things about, the property or real property that we see that qualifies.
So you would like to meet real estate professionals that work in the income producing space, if you will. So they're not just home sellers, buyers. They are folks that are looking to do things or help people do things in the real estate investment space.
Yeah, and here's the awesome thing about it, David. I mentioned earlier about a single family rental. A
Mhm.
lot of times with real estate professionals, this is really where I leave it. I basically give them two kind of things to do. When you ask a client, when you ask a seller, is this their primary residence? And they tell you no, they could be a good candidate for a 1031 exchange.
Okay.
So that's really the simplest conversation that I have with real estate professionals is all you need to do is ask your clients when you're doing your listing presentation, is this your primary residence? And if they say no, then usually the next conversation or the next comment would be, hey, let's get Greg on the phone. He's the 1031 exchange person. Let's talk through this and see if there's a way that we can defer or look at the idea or option of a 1031 exchange.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's in its simplest form. I mean, I try to make it as easy as possible for real estate professionals. I want to be the resource. Like I've been doing this 19 years. I don't know everything about the tax code. I have zero desire to learn everything, but I do know enough and I do know where to find it to put the information in front of the real estate professionals, to put them in front of their clients, to make them, stand out against, their competition.
So do you have any restriction on where you can work, or could you go nationwide? I know you're in the Midwest, in the St. Louis area with me. Could you work with people on the East Coast? The Real Producers podcast is viewed by people in Louisiana on the East Coast, so you can go anywhere.
We can, and that's the other neat thing about 1031 exchanges is that we can do exchanges anywhere in the continental United States.
Okay.
You could sell, we have clients selling property here in St. Louis and they're exchanging for property in Florida. We've got clients in New York exchanging for property in Colorado. Anywhere in the continental United States, that's kind of what we we base it on. I do have colleagues in different markets. So the answer is yes, we can do exchanges anywhere in the country. If you have a question or if you have an area that a client, we may not have somebody local. If we do, I'll be happy to introduce them to you.
Okay.
Again, you want a local resource. But like I said, here in the Midwest, I'm responsible for the state of Missouri, Southern Illinois, but I can go anywhere in the country and I can look at deals anywhere in the country. So be more than happy to be that resource for them as well.
All right. So this is very interesting. What are the timeline requirements to have a successful exchange?
Great question. Remember we said earlier that the 1031 exchange is a process. Really, that's what it is. So
right.
There are some steps to do, obviously, prior to that. But once your property is under contract, we go to close. There's really what we call in the 1031 space. There's two very important numbers to think about when doing a 1031 exchange. The first one is what we call the 45-day identification period. And what that says is that once you close on that property, let's go back for a minute. The first thing you need to do is set up your exchange. Okay, before you close. This is important. So I literally this week I had a conversation with someone. They closed on Monday. They called me on Wednesday. They said, hey, I want to set up an exchange. I'm like, you know what? Unfortunately, I can't help you. So as long as you set your exchange up before you close on the property you want to exchange, and that's part of the process. That's you engage us to do that. And as long as you bounce this off your tax advisor, again, we always recommend that. Once your property closes, you have 45 calendar days to identify that replacement property that you're going to exchange into.
Okay.
So
you got to think about this early in the process, but the actual activity comes after you close.
Correct. The clock starts ticking the day you close.
Okay.
So if let's say we close on our property today, tomorrow is day one of our exchange.
Okay.
We have 45 days to identify what the replacement property is going to be. Okay. And again, there's some steps to do that. There's some things to go through. You also have from today, the closing date, you also have 180 days to close on the property that you identify. Okay. Now there's also an or in there. There's 180 days or your tax filing date, which we're getting close to that point. And again, that's just another part of the process. Again, this is planning. You know, if you tell me that you're closing today, I know that your 180 day is going to be before your tax filing date of next April 15th. If you close in the middle of November, I'm gonna have a conversation with you and your client about, hey, just so you know, if you want to take advantage of the full 180 days, you have to extend your taxes, or don't file your taxes before you complete your exchange.
Okay.
Because you have to file paperwork for the tax year that you started your exchange. So if you do an exchange this year, you start an exchange this year, there's a form you fill out next year when you fill out your taxes about the exchange. So again, it's timing. There's a lot more to that. I can go into more detail on another podcast, or I talk about it in a 3-hour class that I teach. But for the basics, it's 45 days to identify, 180 days to close on the property you identify. That's kind of the basic timeline part of the process. But again, calendar days is what we talk about. Saturdays, Sundays, and holidays are included in that 45 days. It's not banking days. It's not.
So it's calendar days.
Holidays. You think 45 days, you got time. I mean, it's 45 calendar days. Saturdays, Sundays, holidays are included in that identification. So what we've seen and before people have done, once they go under contract and once they kind of build out what the replacement property should look like, they can actually go out and try to find the replacement property before they close on the property they're exchanged into.
Okay.
Start looking. They're confident their property is going to close. They can go do that, and we've seen people do that. So again, It's just a little strategy, little timing, But we work with clients to say, hey, make sure you do this or don't do that, to have a successful exchange.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. I personally didn't even know this existed. I figured there was something like this, but it's not a well-known thing, I'm guessing, at least for people like me who don't have any income property or intent to do that.
Yeah. So, my goal, David, is to have everybody. I want everybody to know this.
Yeah. Well, this should be something to consider. I would think as a financial planner, they should have awareness of this as well.
Yes.
So you mentioned a class that you teach. Do you have one coming up? Or are these scheduled, or are these kind of on-demand classes?
A little bit of both. So okay. I do have classes approved. Just if you're in the St. Louis market, I do have classes approved through the St. Louis Realtor Board.
Okay.
For continuing education. I know if you're in the state of Missouri, next year is a renewal year. So I'll be scheduling classes here in the next couple of weeks for probably first, second quarter. I do also have a class approved in Illinois. It's a little more advanced, but I still talk about some of the stuff we talk about today. We're talking about today, a little more advanced. But we also have like on demand, like for example, I've got a handful of classes. Like I'll go to an office, like a real estate professional office, and do like their, weekly meeting or monthly meeting. And I'll have a 15, 20, 30-minute conversation. One of the things I want to get into before the end of the podcast is I really want to focus in on the real estate professionals to try to give them some talking topics and some ideas and some trigger points for clients to go out and when they have conversations, just to kind of know and learn and kind of know how to have that conversation.
Yeah.
For people that could qualify for 1031. So I mean,
they know what questions to ask early. I think that's the message I'm getting. You need to think about this early in the process, whatever the process is. This needs to be a topic of conversation.
It does. Yes, I highly encourage that. I mean, I have conversations with customers. They're thinking about selling next year. Great. Here's some information. Here's some links to talk about some things to kind of get you, in with it. And to be honest, David, I've got people that call me. They may call me today and say, "Hey, we're going to close tomorrow. Can you set up our exchange?" Sometimes operationally, if we can have the bandwidth for it, but most of the time we can set up an exchange the day before, 2 days before, 3 days before. That's fine too. I get both. I get people that call me, hey, we're closing tomorrow. I get people call me and say, hey, we're closing in 6 months. Either way, we'll accommodate it the best we can.
Do you have rushes, like periods of time during the year that are busier than others?
That's a good question. So, typically we kind of ebb and flow with the closing cycle. If you're in real estate, you know that usually the end of the month, the last week of the month is kind of an ebb. It's kind of a peak for deal flow, deal transaction. So we'll see a spike maybe the week before, maybe the week of. A lot of times going into fourth quarter, like we are now, I know we're in mid-October during this podcast, the fourth quarter seems to get busy. People want to get something done by the end of the year. So we're seeing an uptick there. But really it kind of ebb and flows, one, with the market, with what's going on with the market. And two, it kind of flows with the transaction cycle. Typically the last week of the month, usually the fourth quarter gets kind of busy, but other than that, we just take them as they come. So.
Sure. Well, you were talking about bandwidth. I just was wondering if there's a time of year that is better or more busier for you operationally.
Yeah, it ebb and flows.
So if I'm going to think about income property, I definitely need to have this on my mind. If I have a piece of property that I'm going to sell in exchange for another one, I need to be thinking about this. So,
yeah.
So are there different types of exchanges in terms of, well, you mentioned the air exchange. I think that is incredible to think about.
Yeah, it's a neat story.
We talked about the type of properties. We talked about the timeline. So how do you stay top of mind with the real estate people? Because, I'm sure there's tons of stuff rolling around in their heads for potential clients.
There is.
So how do you stay top of mind? How do you get out in the marketplace and so people know who you are and what you do?
That's the $64,000 question. How do you be top of mind everywhere?
Yeah.
With social media and all the stuff going on. I mean, that's, the goal is to be everywhere for everyone.
Sure.
But I still believe being in the real estate space and being in this 1031 space, I still believe at the end of the day, it's a people business. I love getting out and meeting with real estate professionals. You mentioned financial advisors. I talk to financial advisors, CPAs, attorneys. Again, it's all about being a resource. But yeah, I mean, we've got social media stuff. We've got national marketing, from a company perspective. So, we try to be top of mind. I suggest giving something like this to real estate professionals. When they go on a presentation, let's, again, going back to the question, is this a primary residence? If they say no, a lot of times I'll just say, give them one of these.
Yeah.
Right.
And you don't have to say any more. Just give them one of those.
Just give them one of those. It's a lot of times what I encourage real estate professionals is it looks like this. What you say is important to a client, but also what you don't say is equally important, because we've had situations, not we personally, but I've seen situations, actually court cases, where, the real estate broker got subpoenaed into court because their client last year sold a property. I mean, the real estate professional did their job. They sold a property for a client. The client went to their tax advisor the following year, filling out their taxes. The tax advisor went, hey, looks like you sold this property and you made like $150,000. Yeah. This wasn't your primary residence. How come you didn't do a 1031 exchange? I didn't know there was such thing as a 1031 exchange.
Yeah.
Well, who sold your property for you? Again, you know what I'm saying? So don't be that real estate agent.
Yeah.
Don't
be
give them
that
the
guy.
information,
Yeah.
know there's a resource, and then we can have the conversation about what it looks like. Because the last thing we want real estate, the last thing anybody wants to do is be subpoenaed into court.
Mhm.
And it's just a matter of, hey, I gave them this information. They knew about it. They just chose not to do it.
Exactly.
So it's things like that. It's, again, not only planning for the clients that want to do the exchanges. I really enjoy going out and talking to the real estate professionals and helping them plan. For example, we've got this neat little handout called, and I'll go into it. We've got, having conversations with clients. It's called 5 Reasons to Consider a 1031.
Mhm.
Talk to the client. I mean, every client's different. Every deal's different. The 5 different reasons that we talk about are things like preservation of equity.
Right.
Instead of paying the taxes, why don't you use that instead of paying those taxes, use that as leverage and go out and buy more real estate.
Right.
What does that look like? The other thing we talk about is diversification. Not only can we diversify it in different locations, we talked about nationwide, but we can also diversify into asset classes. Let's say you have somebody that owns a small office building and they want to exchange for a vacation home and some land in Colorado. They can do that.
Mhm.
They can diversify not only the location geographically, but also the asset class.
Sure.
If they want to get out of, the next thing I want to talk about is management relief. That's a reason. This is another fun story that I have. I call it if you're a property manager or if you have property, you manage it yourself over the years.
Uh-huh.
I know there's more to it, but I call it the 3 T's of owning property. At any given time, you're chasing one of the 3 T's: toilet, sanitation, or trash. Any of those 3.
Yep.
And if you're a property manager, you can relate, because I used to be one. You're chasing all of that stuff. There may come a time where your client's going to say, you know what, I give up. Take these 8, 10, 15. We had a gentleman over in Kansas City. It's been probably 15 years ago. He had 64 rentals. He had some duplexes, but primarily single family.
Uh-huh.
And I specifically, this is an awesome, cute little old couple story. I remember going to their house, sitting down at their table, and I looked at the gentleman and I said, so tell me why you're selling all 64 of these properties. He said, well, my wife came to me and said I had 2 choices. I either chose our marriage or the 64 properties.
Huh.
I'm like,
Yeah.
sir, it sounds like you're making a good choice. So what they did is they actually did 3 different exchanges. They sold part of their portfolio in one exchange. They sold another part in another exchange, and they sold the rest of them in another exchange. They put multiple properties together and they exchanged into one property. They put multiple properties together and they exchanged into 2 properties. They put multiple properties together and they exchanged into another property.
Okay.
And they went on and lived their best life because he was no longer managing, because he's self-managed. He was in his late 60s, early 70s. He was self-managing 64 rental units spread out around Kansas City Metro.
I can't imagine the challenge of that.
But again, I asked him, he said, my wife, my marriage, or my property? And I said, well, you're making the right decision.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we did. So again, management relief. The last one, we talked about financial planners. I tell real estate professionals, you need to have a very solid, strong financial planner on the estate planning side. Because a lot of times what we find that a number of family members are going to inherit, or sometimes they inherit, one large property.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if there's multiple siblings that are going to inherit this property, what do you think usually happens either before or right after the property is inherited?
They want to sell it.
Somebody does.
Yeah.
Somebody wants their money.
Right.
So what I tell real estate professionals, have a conversation, 5 reasons to exchange. Tell me more about why you're selling this. Well, I'm selling this one asset because I have 3 kids and I know that they're not going to get along. One kid wants to keep it. One kid wants the cash. One kid wants to go live in a van down by the river, kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So it's just like you either plan for it now or you plan for it later. So a lot of times we have estate planning, call it estate planning conversations with clients for real estate.
Okay.
And again, it may be a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, or 15-year plan. But if you can separate yourself from the competition to have those conversations, you can be the expert person they call when the time is ready to do that.
Okay.
So those are some of the 5. Those are kind of the top 5. There's more. What's interesting, David, is there's actually non-tax motive reasons that we have. There's a handful of non-tax motive reasons that we talk to, we can show real estate professionals or have conversations about. But again, the top 5 are, preservation of equity, leverage, diversification, management relief. That's a big one. And then the estate planning side of it. So yeah, again, at the end of the day, it's a conversation. Every client's different.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, every client is different, and the benefit, whatever the benefit will be, is different as well.
Yes.
But that in many cases, the big deal is to start talking.
Have the conversation
think about this and start talking.
and have the conversation. And yeah, I think that's great because, another example, I mean, we have clients like, well, what's your minimum? Like, what's your minimum deal size? And I'm like, there is no minimum deal size. Our goal is to help you defer up to 100% capital gain tax.
Yeah.
I mean, we've done exchanges. We've done exchanges for clients that sold a property for $46,000.
Really?
And they exchanged for something else. They exchange into something else. We've done exchanges for clients that own $45 million property. So it doesn't matter. The goal for us is to help them maximize and defer up to 100% of their capital gain tax. There is no minimum deal size. It could be a single family rental for $100,000. It could be a multi. It could be a regional mall for $100 million. Doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
We'll do all. We've done all of them. We'll do all of them because that's our goal.
So if I'm a real estate professional and watching this podcast, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah. So I am on social media. I've got an Instagram. It's at Greg Showe 1031. We're just in the early launch stage of that. So I'm putting content out on there. At Greg Showe 1031. LinkedIn, I've got a LinkedIn profile if you research my name. My direct cell phone, if you want me to say it, I can put that out there.
Up to you. That's up to you.
All right. My email address is gregs@apiexchange.com.
Okay.
I'll go ahead. It's a work phone. So my work phone number is area code 314-651-3496.
Okay.
I don't call myself very often, so I had to look on the board and write it down.
I understand.
Yeah, I talk to myself sometimes, but I don't call myself. So yeah, it happens.
Whatever works.
Yeah, and then our website apiexchange.com. If you're in other markets, like I mentioned before, we do have, if you go to the locate an office tab, click on the state. If we've got somebody in that state, reach out to them and just say, hey, I heard Greg, talk on a podcast. I know you're the person for the state that I'm in. But if there is no division manager for that state, I mean, I'd be more than happy to work with you. I can do deals anywhere in the country. But as a company, just for example, logistics, our corporate office is in California, out in Sacramento area. We also have a Eastern Regional office, which is in New York, out on Long Island. So those are our operational offices. That's where all the documentation's done. That's where all the exchange teams are. That's where we, spend a lot of time, making sure the deals get done in accordance. So we can cover West Coast, Mountain Time, Central Time, East Coast.
Sure.
But like I said, apiexchange.com is a great resource. There's we've got over 150 templates that you can go in and customize. You can put your name and information on it, kind of like the brochure back here. We've got a lot of one-page informational stuff, a lot of articles. If you have a marketing campaign, if you want to put together a marketing campaign, you can contact me as well. we can help build that. You know, our national marketing can do that as well too. Again, my goal, David, to be honest, anybody listening to this, is just to be a resource for anybody, whether it's a real estate professional, you know, the actual, you know, end user, whoever it is, be a resource for them and help them, you know, with the information that they need, and also provide the service, because that's how, obviously, I mean, honestly, that's how we get paid. You know, there's a fee for our service to help them do that. But when you realize what you're actually saving, it's well worth the money. I mean, it really is.
Okay.
It's well worth the money.
Yeah. Well, and to have it done correctly in the time frame it needs to be done reduces much consternation, I'm sure.
Yes. We want the real estate community to outshine, you know, in their clients' eyes, and refer them back to more clients.
Yeah.
You know, refer them back to more clients. It's one of the things that I talk about, you know, strategies for real estate professionals. You know, I work with some of the brokers in the community. They've only got a handful of clients. They've got 8, maybe 10 clients, but all their clients call them because they've built the foundation of being a resource, whether it's 1031 resource, whether it's comp resource, whether, you know, it's, you know, I've seen brokers and agents thrive just by being what we call an exchange agent.
Yeah.
Take some of the information that we give you, go out and market yourself as an exchange agent. Next thing you know, people are calling you.
Yeah.
You know, put together a team, myself, you know, a tax advisor, put together a rock star team, and just, you know, just go out and do deals.
Yeah. That sounds great.
Yeah.
So I think we'll stop for now, but I appreciate your time and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and learn more.
No, my pleasure, David. I really appreciate the opportunity as well. And thanks for reaching out. And again, if you have any questions, by all means, you can find us if you can, you know, we're out there. So we're happy to share anything we got.
Great. Thanks much.
All right.
Okay. I stopped recording.